In a valley made of rolling green clay hills lived a farmer named Silas. Every morning, Silas worked in his small barn, churning fresh cream into thick, golden blocks of butter. His hands, marked with the gentle swirls of thumbprints from the clay that formed him, were steady and kind. Silas was a simple man who took great pride in the freshness of his farm's bounty. Once a week, Silas loaded his wagon and headed to the village to see the local baker, Barnaby. Barnaby was a stout man with a tall white hat and an apron dusted with flour-like white powder. "Good morning, Silas." Barnaby would boom, exchanging a large, crusty loaf of bread for a 1-pound block of Silas's famous butter. It was a deal they had kept for years. Barnaby loved the butter, but one morning, a seed of doubt sprouted in his mind. As he held the golden block, it felt just a little bit lighter than usual. He looked at his rows of perfect bread and then back at the butter. "Is Silas giving me less than I pay for?" Barnaby wondered, his clay eyebrows knitting together in suspicion. Barnaby decided to check. He pulled out his old brass scales, the kind with 2 hanging pans. He placed a heavy 1-pound iron weight on one side and Silas's butter on the other. The scale tipped sharply toward the iron weight. The butter didn't even come close to balancing it. Barnaby's face turned a shade of angry crimson clay. "I've been cheated," he barked. The next day, Barnaby marched Silas to the village court. The townspeople gathered, their clay faces peeking through the windows. Barnaby pointed a finger at the humble farmer. "Justice must be served," Barnaby shouted to the judge. "Silas has been selling me butter that weighs much less than the pound he promised." The village judge, a wise woman named Verity, sat behind a high mahogany-colored desk. She wore a robe of deep purple felt and peered through wire-rimmed glasses. She looked at Silas, who stood quietly with his cap in his hands. "Silas," Judge Verity said calmly, "do you use a set of scales to weigh the butter you sell to the baker?" Silas looked up at the judge and shook his head slowly. "Your Honor," he said softly, "I am a poor farmer. I don't own a proper set of iron weights like the baker does." The courtroom went silent. Barnaby huffed, leaning back with a smirk. "See?" he whispered to the crowd. "He admits he doesn't even know what a pound is." Judge Verity raised a hand for silence. "Then tell me, Silas," she asked, "how do you manage to measure the butter you sell?" Silas reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, worn object. "It is quite simple, Your Honor," Silas explained. "Years ago, when Barnaby started buying butter from me, I decided to use his bread as my guide." The courtroom gasped. Silas continued, "Every time the baker gives me a 1-pound loaf of bread, I put it on one side of my homemade scale, and then I pour enough butter onto the other side to match it exactly. If the butter Barnaby received was short of a pound, it is only because the bread he gave me was short of a pound too." Judge Verity nodded slowly. "In life," she said to the room, "we get back what we give to others. Barnaby, you measured Silas by your own standard." Barnaby lowered his head, realizing his own dishonesty had come back to him. From that day on, the baker's bread was always full weight, and the farmer's butter was always perfectly fair.